Hello, today I'm going to be talking about Operation Barbarossa, which was Germany's invasion of the USSR in the late 30s and early 40s. The operation started out as really a conflict between the USSR and Germany's aspirations for Europe. And so, prior to the actual conflict, in the late 1930s, the Germans were trying to basically take over all of Europe. They wanted everyone to be kind of within their control, or really Hitler or not the Nazi leadership wanted all of Europe to be within their control, and all the other powers within Europe were kind of on edge. So that you saw the UK, the Soviets, France, all making agreements with Germany, like non-aggression agreements, just to ensure that they were safe and not going to be taken over. What ends up happening is Germany ends up just completely disregarding those agreements most of the time, in the case of France, the UK, and Russia. Hitler was beginning to get a lot more aggressive in the late 30s and early 40s. So you end up seeing the common desire for the Balkan territories, which is your Montenegro, Croatia, all those nations. They have a heavy deposit of oil in some places. So the Germans and the Soviets both kind of lay claim to that, and what Germany ends up doing is basically disregarding the non-aggression agreement that they have with the Soviets because of their need for oil, and the Balkan territories have a lot of it. So they end up disregarding the non-aggression agreement in 1939 or 1940, and trying to basically just take over Soviet Russia is the solution to getting the Balkan territories, because they know if they try to take the Balkan territories without the Soviets' approval, then they will be at an attack, so they might as well go ahead and attack Moscow first. So at the time, the Germans, they have the territories leading up to Soviet Russia because they've invaded a lot of them. So what ends up happening is the Germans, they start planning Operation Barbarossa to invade Soviet Russia. So it basically ends up as a three-flanked invasion of Moscow. So you've got the north invasion trying to basically overtake some smaller cities around the Moscow metropolitan area at the time, and establish kind of military bases or just military supply points to be able to feed those troops that are going in. And then they also had a center flank, which went directly into the city, and then the south flank, which went through the bottom of the city. So what ended up happening was the southern and center flanks, and northern flanks, they all won those first outside battles, just because of Germany had a strong technological advantage at the time with regards to just guns, automatic weapons, tanks. They had a lot of engineering in the early 1930s and 40s, sponsored by Nazi Germany. So they had a lot of technological advantage as opposed to Russia, a communist state. So they obviously don't engineer as well. So Germany ends up winning the first major battles of the invasion. But then as you start to see the invasion progress and time go on, it starts to get colder in Russia, then you see Germany start to fall back a little. So Germany actually puts like a 1 month pause, I think there's a name for it, but they basically cease conflict for about a month or so, and that gives time for it to get a lot colder and snow and ice in Moscow, but it also gives Russia time to kind of prepare for future conflict. So they bring Siberian troops down, which are even more prepared for the cold and the ice, and then they establish a lot of defense points, and they really just start planning for counterattacks. And so you see after 30 days or 45 days or so, the conflict starts back again, and the Soviets are able to push back all the Germans. They lose a few battles, but the really close ones, when the north flank comes into Moscow and the center flank comes into Moscow, the Soviets are able to push them off both times and defend Moscow. So that's when you see the Germans really start to fall back, and the Soviets, you begin to see victory for the Soviets. And so that ends up putting a big dent into the plan of Hitler and his desires to take over all of Europe, because now he has a superpower within Europe that has influence over the region. So he's now basically not able to he doesn't get the Balkan states like he intended to get, and he has a very strong enemy right at his border. So that's just some of the sign. If he were to, a lot of historians say, if he were to have taken over Moscow and obtained Russia, that would have been a very different story for Hitler in World War II, because he would have had a lot more territory, he would have had a lot more oil, and he would have been able to ramp up his military and maybe be able to take over Russia, or I'm sorry, the UK and France and some other European territories. So yeah, that's the story of Operation Barbarossa, and I hope you learned something.